Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of the decorating of the Avatar catsuit. After completing the front panel, I moved on to the back panel. At first, all I am interested in for this first day of working is filling in the shapes. These shapes were marked out at an earlier stage, and later in the video I will show how this was done. The method of filling in is very simple. Dip the stick into the paint, the mixture of latex with acrylic, outline the shape and block in. The paint goes on very easily, running smoothly off the stick. Over time the paint coagulates into rubber, building up layers around the stick. This sometimes becomes an inconvenience, and so periodically we have to pluck the build-up off. At other times, such as with the filling in of larger shapes, it can make our life easier by broadening out the size of the stick. With the petal type shapes I am producing here, I can score into the surface of the blocked out areas to produce lines that add some textural variation. We will see later that while the shapes currently being produced are white, I will also add more transparent colours over the top once the first layers are dry. This prevents the overall design from appearing too mechanical, too symmetrical, as if made by machine, adding subtle colour variation across the surface that makes it feel more natural and engaging to the eye. Throughout my working, I am constantly paying reference to a small printout of the pattern sections and the kinds of colours I originally included in my design, although I do not stick religiously to them but respond to the work in progress. This prevents the process of painting from feeling too much like a paint by numbers application, that I am just acting robotically. For more complex colours I do not attempt to produce these initially, so all the subtle variations and say the various greens are all initially laid out as the same green. On the second day of painting, this is when I produce the second and third layers of paint upon the shapes, taking the colours I am using from the pots and mixing them on a plate with extra latex to produce more transparent colours. Let's just pause for a second and ask ourselves, what is this stuff we are painting with? While we may look at someone, say, dressed in a catsuit, and say it is made from latex, this is in fact wrong. What they are dressed in is rubber. Latex is a liquid product produced by certain plants. It is found in strawberries, lettuce, poppies, and around 30,000 other kinds of plants. If you snap a dandelion stalk, you will see this fluid. The latex will rise to the surface and it will appear white. It will look like milk. Latex is Latin for fluid. Different plants produce different kinds of latex, so in certain poppies it becomes opium. But the one we are interested in, the Hevea brasiliensis tree, it forms the rubber sheeting we use to make garments. Rubber, in comparison to the latex from which it is derived, is a bit like cheese in comparison to milk, a product derived from its more fluid origin. Due to the origins of rubber coming from a fluid, we can also think of rubber sheeting as a film of dried paint. So when you see me painting on rubber sheeting, you are seeing me apply wet paint on dried paint. What we see in the various examples here is just that, in which the rubber sheeting acts as the canvas for the latex paint. What this opens up to us, to anyone interested in painting on rubber sheeting, is that we can also produce rubber sheeting. Now, we may not have the space or the resources to produce the kind of sheeting used for making traditional rubber garments, but we can produce it in small quantities by simply painting latex or pouring it upon a sheet of glass. We can also embed all kinds of things into the latex, from pigments for colour to mica. We can embed petals and leaves, meshing, sand, quite literally anything, but always keeping in mind that certain metals such as copper can make rubber deteriorate. In this way we can produce any kind of imagery using latex, as well as produce rubber that imitates any kind of texture. We can make it look like bark, stone, metal, flesh. What this all opens up to us is a whole new world of creativity, and think upon latex and rubber in a whole new light, as a medium of self-expression. Anyway, back to the job at hand. So after one day of filling in the shapes with their basic colour, and a second day of painting second layers of more subtle and transparent colours over the top of the first, the back panel is now complete. A layer of pure latex was sponged over the top to act as a kind of varnish, and finally a conditioner applied to prevent the rubber from accidentally sticking to itself. Okay, let's take a look at the marking out of the pattern. Most of the time I prefer to work free-form, but in the case with the catsuit, symmetry is involved between the left and right sides, and as such the various shapes do require marking out to maintain the look of this symmetry. We can see the marked out shapes across the rubber sheeting here. To do this, the shapes were already included on the pattern templates, and these were then aligned into their marked out areas on the rubber. The shapes were then drawn around quite firmly using a biro pen. Because rubber sheeting comes with a fine dusting of powder that prevents the sheeting from sticking to itself during transportation and whilst in storage, the drawing around of the shapes leaves an impression in the powder, which I can then redraw around upon the rubber so that I do not accidentally disturb it during painting. You might notice that I am pressing quite firmly with the pen. This doesn't have anything to do with leaving an impression in the powder, but instead of producing a more visible shape on the underside of the paper, so that when I flip the pattern template over to produce the mirror image of the shape, I can see the shape required more clearly. Sometimes there may be insufficient powder on the sheeting to leave a visible trace of the shapes I am trying to produce, so on occasion I apply a dusting of talc. When painting, this often does not affect the colour of the paint, but if one is concerned that it will, it can easily be wiped off with a damp cloth before any application. You can see here that the underside of the paper has some ridges. This is the result of the firm pressing of the pen to make the shapes more visible. Okay, back to the painting. Blocking in the shapes. There's a lot to do, so see you in a couple of days. Thanks for joining me today. As you can see, there is still a lot to do, so join me next time for more Watching Paint Dry with Catasta Charisma.